All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mike McQueen, and this podcast is called For the Love of Libraries. And I'm so happy to announce that I have Steve Hargadon with us. Steve, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm super glad to be here.
All right, Steve, let's kick it off with your favorite memory of For the Love of Libraries, a memory of a librarian or someone that inspired you as a
Yeah, it's
librarian.
it's funny because I didn't come into this library world directly, right? So I started an online community for education, and then a guy named Bill Drew, who started Library 2.0, I was a fan of, said he was going to shut it down, and I
Mm.
said,
Oh,
"Bill, I'll pay the fees, keep it going. I just think it's important." And he said, "Well, I didn't even want to do the work." So I said, "Well, I'll take it over if you want." So at that point in time, it had 4,000 members. It now has 58,000 members. But I'm
that's
not your
awesome.
typical library guy. I mean, I grew up on Stanford campus. I rode my bike to the Middlefield Palo Alto Library, but I don't have a favorite librarian because I didn't really know that many librarians. Let's just
Okay.
say all librarians are my favorite librarians
Yeah.
because I love the field. But I came from a different angle, so I mean, I don't probably don't have that memory of a librarian that drove me into the field.
Well, and even just like a lot of people I've talked to have referenced similar things. It's more about the institution that was special that they loved. So tell us about the Palo Alto Library. Like anything that, like how old were you when you first started going, and what was that experience like for you? Why did you pick that?
Well, I actually lived fairly close to it because we lived off campus when my dad first started working for Stanford, and it was a stone's throw, literally. And so my
Okay.
mom would take us there. And then when we moved on campus, I just remember riding my bike down. I I just love books. I have several thousand books here in my office, and
I see them. Some of them.
they're Dewey cataloged. And I
All right.
use and I use Library Thing to have them all tracked.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm just
that's
a
great.
lover of books. And
Yeah.
the interesting thing about books is they're a medium through which important conversations have taken place. The book is I don't think the book's going to turn out to be our ultimate best medium for conversations about
Mm,
ideas. But after the advent of the printing press, right, it became a very easy way or a good way of communicating ideas independently. When someone sits down to write a book, you're writing your book, you're by the time this interview comes out, it will be published, right? But you've taken all of this information you've put it into a structured format so you make sure you cover everything. But if you and I were to talk about the contents of the book, it would be a back and forth conversation.
right.
So the book is a great way of encapsulating all of the knowledge, but it's not great for the back and forth conversation. Like I believe in writing in books, so I scribble all over the books. I
Right.
did a session a couple of months ago called "How to Read a Book with AI"
Okay.
because you can get AI to eh, these large language models probably illegally read every book available, right?
Yeah, yeah. Scraping the internet.
Well, yeah,
Not to
and they
mention,
all use this same database of questionable provenance material, but I think they had access to all this. But you can go in and talk to a large language model about a book, and it will know the content of the book, and you can have an actual conversation on the ideas in the book based
hmm
on kind of the way in which our brains work to move from one subject to the next, right? So your book's going to be this great encapsulation, but I'd be shocked if in 2 or 3 or 4 years when someone publishes a book, they don't also publish a custom GPT with the contents of the book so someone
hmm
can go in and ask the book questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Wait a second, let me write that down. That's a good
yeah.
idea. Yeah, I mean, and it's just pretty crazy how fast things are changing and the possibilities that are already here and what's coming right around the corner and who knows in the near future what things are gonna look like and how that might change. Um, Okay, let's back up a step now. Kind of give us a little background about yourself, like, um, where, like, fill us in both your professional career and then your connections to AI, like, so we get to know you a little bit.
So the abbreviated story is I had a real interest in open source software. I did an interview series on open source and education, how you would look at education the same way that open source software is developed, which is a really fun topic. But so in that interview series, I interviewed Mark Andreessen, who's now sort of a famous venture capitalist, but at the time was sort of a developer. He was the guy who invented the original web browser, University of
Okay.
Illinois, I think.
Okay.
So I interviewed Mark, and he and his business partner, Gianna Bianchini, had started something called Ning. And Ning was a host your own
Ning.
community. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember Ning. Isn't it still around?
Library 2.0 is a Ning. It's built on the Ning platform. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So there was this just incredible outpouring of both Ning and wikis allowed educators and librarians and others to build resource sites and communities. It was just a brilliant period of time. And Bill Drew created Library 2.0, and I created Classroom 2.0. And like I said, Bill ended up wanting to shut down Library 2.0. Classroom 2.0 was doing really well. And so I kind of took that over. Then I met Sandy Hirsch from San Jose State University
Hmm.
and was speaking at a conference that she had invited me to, or that San Jose had invited me to. And we got connected and we started holding online conferences for librarians, large free, that San Jose State sponsored, multi-day conferences. At the same time, I was running something called the Global Education Conference.
And what year about was this when you first started with her? About roughly.
Oh my gosh, it had to have been 2011.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it was incredible. I mean, uh, tens of thousands of people registering and attending over the course of 3 days.
Mm,
Sessions 24 hours a day. But it's hard to remember how exciting that was, because this idea that we can actually connect with people from all over the world. I,
hmm.
I remember somebody in the Global Education Conference. I remember doing the first one and being so worried. Would it actually go? Would it work? Would the
Mm.
technology work?
Like, yeah, would a
Yeah.
freezer just crash?
No. And we had hundreds of sessions. We had 52 keynote speakers in that first Global Education Conference. And someone emailed me and said, I don't think you know what a keynote speaker is. You can't have 52 of them. But we had,
Right.
in the Global Education Conference, we had 5 days, 24 hours a day. And we had people who said, I've just stayed up 72 hours. I've never done anything like this before. But it was so exciting. It was
Wow.
so exciting. So anyway,
Wow.
long story short, we became a little bit more used to online events. We shortened the Library 2.0 events to 1 day, and now they're 3-hour mini conferences. You've participated in them. Some of them
Yep.
will get 8, 10, 12,000 registrations. So there's
Hmm.
a decent size. And they're just really fun. And San Jose State's been a great sponsor supporter of them, so they've been able to be free. And then Library 2.0, I started offering about 6 years ago paid webinars, largely with Dr. Steve Albrecht on library safety, that have kind of been another source of revenue for the project.
Right. And okay, so let's dive into professional development a little bit now. So talk to us a little bit more about the importance of professional development, especially with AI. And let me just throw one more thought out there. I mean, I know the Library 2.0 webinars and online conferences that you talk about address many different topics, but in the last year, excuse me, maybe last 2 years that I started being connected with you and the webinar, I mean, Libraries 2.0 webinars and conferences and everything, it just seems like it has exploded. So, can you talk a little bit about the importance of PD with AI and what everything that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And the 2023 initial events I did on AI were the most popular I've ever done. So I think the difficulty of AI is that we're trying to understand the technology. We're trying to understand its impact. We're trying to understand its usefulness. It's not an uncomplicated thing. I've come to the conclusion, because the makers of the large language models will admit, Anthropic most vocally right now, that they don't know
Makes
how
plot.
they're working. Yeah.
Yeah.
So somehow they've built these incredible neural networks that are language based, that are based on language frequency, right? And a large language model that struggled to tell you how many R's were in the word strawberry, because they don't store the word strawberry, was also at the same time producing what appeared to be deep thought, right? So I've decided that, tentatively, that large language models have developed a new form of intelligence. It's a synthetic intelligence. It doesn't have our subconscious. It doesn't have our emotions. It doesn't have our kind of Paleolithic limitations. It's just an intelligence based on language. But it's an incredibly valuable tool used in certain ways. I really struggle when people will post the response of an AI, a large language model, and say, well, you see, I'm proving this point. AI says that Elon Musk hates Donald Trump, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because everything that a large language model creates is fabricated. And it's fabricated based on the context of all the training material and on the nature of the conversation you're having with it. So it doesn't know truth. It somehow has developed a process of language fluency that is super helpful, but it doesn't have our human capacity to extrapolate, or to identify intent, or to understand why there could be a predominance of evidence in one area, but that's actually not true, right? So it doesn't have those capabilities, but it is doing something really valuable. So professional development at this point is, sort of critical, because librarians are information specialists, right? And so this is a field in which you'd say there should be some great leadership here. But librarians themselves feel super confused.
Yeah.
Is it a threat? How do I feel about the copyright? How do I feel about the energy usage? How do I feel about um, uh, information literacy in general, misinformation, disinformation? These are really hard topics. So the dialogue around AI, both in conferences and webinars and workshops, is really important, because we're struggling to figure out how it's like we're building the plane as it's flying.
Right. Right.
It's really difficult to figure out, okay, what's actually going on here. So hopefully the webinars and the workshops and the conferences are a way of having those good conversations. Can I tell you one quick story?
Yeah, please.
So the last Libraries and AI conference that I did, mini conference, we took all of the conference recordings. They were held in Zoom. We took the transcripts of those recordings and fed them into AI. I think it was ChatGPT, and asked
And give us an idea of how many though, like, because you're talking about how many?
25 sessions.
25 sessions, each a half hour long or hour?
Well, and the opening keynote was an hour, and the closing keynote was half an hour, and all the other sessions were half an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
So we not only had the ability for you, when you went to look at the recordings, to click a summary of the session, right? So you didn't have to listen to 12 hours or 13 hours of content to figure out which ones you wanted to actually spend the time listening to. But we also had it summarize the conference as a whole. And so when I go into, like, I just did a report on libraries and digital literacy. And so I used the deep research model, and I specifically asked 3 different large language models, look at the conference content from the last 2 years and tell me what librarians are saying about these topics and which are the most important. And this is fascinating, because it's like having a personal researcher, and it would take that personal researcher days to do what the large language model can do in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So how do we feel about that? We had people,
Right.
we had one presenter who said, I'm really uncomfortable that you had our session summarized by AI. And I'm
Really?
like, well,
Okay.
everything gets published on YouTube. Anybody could have done it. There are really great extensions within Google Chrome where you can just go to YouTube and it will tell you, here's a summary of the YouTube video.
Right.
I mean, I probably process 10 times as many YouTube videos as I used to because those summaries really help me to know where do I want to spend my time. So it's complicated, and PD is kind of our way of negotiating the territory, trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and you mentioned the the conflict of interest that so many librarians have, and it all those things that you listed are so it's so true. And it's hard when we hear the world's CEOs of the biggest companies making all this, when we hear them repeatedly now for many years talk about their concerns and the need for, regulation from a governmental standpoint, and the existential threats, and like there's just so much that is causing a lot of fear. Can you talk a little bit about what role does that play with librarians maybe struggling with PD because it can be so stressful and nerve-wracking, and what can or should they do about that?
I'm going to talk about it at the level at which you asked the question, and then I'm going to ask if you'll indulge me to go one step higher for just a brief moment.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's a lot of fear and concern, and I think rightly so, but a lot of it is just our human nature of resisting change,
Mm,
right? So, there's so much that AI can do that's super helpful. Uh, I learn in conversation. So I've learned that the large language models that have the audio version that allow me to actually talk to the large language model in a car drive, I can explore an idea. I call it the care and feeding of ideas in a way that's just so great. It's like having a best friend in the car to talk through an idea with.
yeah.
But it is change, and it breaks a lot of the traditional rules and structures about how we think about content. I can get a large language model to generate a short science fiction story that will be better than anything I would buy because it's really good, right?
Yeah. Right.
Always, but
Yeah.
and if I'm interested in a public figure, I can ask it to give me a biography and read it out loud to me in a way that could be very customized. Like I was very interested in Thomas Sowell, the Hoover Institute fellow and the public figure, and I said, "Can you tell me about his life from the standpoint of education?" And it gave me a biography of his life related to his education experiences because he dropped
Hmm.
out of high school, and I'm like, okay, he's now at the
Mm.
Hoover Institute. This is a really interesting guy. So this ability to get sort of custom information, but
Instantly.
instantly, but knowing that it's fabricated or it's constructed, fabricated not in the sense of a lie, but fabricated in the sense of being constructed, means that I can't trust it necessarily, but it's giving me great information. So let me just jump up to the higher level for a moment. Almost all of our social narratives are not true, right? If
Okay.
our brains developed during the 2 million years of the Paleolithic period and they developed for narrative, not for truth, but evolution selected for survival, not for truth. And there was probably a great survival benefit to good cohesive narratives within groups. But I could go down the list of almost all of our large scale social institutions: banking, pharmaceutical, medical, food. And I could say to you, what do they really do? And what's the story that they tell about what they do?
Mm,
Right? There's an institutional imperative to use the story that resonates. The tobacco industry is like this great kind of too easy example, right? But I mean, they're telling people that cigarettes were healthy and people accepting that for a long time. Those of us who can kind of were close enough to remember the fallout from that. Well, those companies very quickly bought food companies and they used the same playbook. And so they create food that we want and desire, fat, salt, and sugar. But the idea that they're there to help us be healthy is not actually true. They're there to make a profit. So there's this institutional imperative that rewards doing what works. Kevin Kelly wrote a really interesting book called What Technology Wants that relates to this. So at some sort of really high level, we have a hard time recognizing that most of what we're told isn't actually true. Maybe a good example would be invading Iraq after 9/11. There's pretty much a good consensus right now that there was a lot of lying that went on. And in fact, the young girl who testified that she saw Iraqi soldiers bayoneting babies in the orphanage turned out to be a PR stunt by Hill and Knowlton that is now well documented that she was the daughter of an ambassador and it was all invented. So all of a sudden we have this technology which now has the capability of helping us deconstruct the narratives, but we're built for narratives. We want narratives. And AI is based on large scale narratives. So in the Overton window. So we have to recognize that AI is not telling us the truth. It's telling us what most people have believed that wrote things that it could absorb. So from a standpoint of information literacy, this is a huge conundrum, right? Because that Overton window set of beliefs, the beliefs that are acceptable, aren't necessarily true. So we think that because AI is so fluent that it's going to tell us the truth, but it's not. It's just regurgitating what we want and what the general beliefs are. So there's some really fascinating stuff coming down the pike.
Well, and the whole the role of bias is so popular with AI, and because it was initially trained and when it first was released to the world, it was blatantly obvious about problems. But what you're talking about too kind of addresses. I mean, there's bias in media companies before social media was a thing. I mean, everything that we read written by someone or a video created or anything is influenced by the person or organization that's creating it. And so the ability to you know evaluate information based off of what traditional techniques we would use and we knew as librarians now is kind of all is all changing. Can you connect that to the need for professional development? And like, so if I'm already scared about, AI and the impact it's having and all the problems and terrible stuff with it, and then you add that into the conundrum of what is reliable information, how do we what's the connection then with professional development, both like internal, my own professional development, and then also me helping give professional development? Like, what do you see that? How is that all connected?
Yeah, I mean, there's some low-hanging fruit that I see a lot of people taking advantage of, right? So you can show some pretty glaring examples. And now with the new developments in video, and it's going to be really hard to tell something truthful from something that's been
Like
completely
deep
fabricated.
fakes. Hmm.
Yeah, and not just deep fakes, but part of the things that Google has released in the past 2 weeks are allowing people to make videos that look absolutely real. Like they
Yeah.
look like real
Yeah.
people. Okay, so we're and they are going to create emotional responses in us, and we do have a subconscious, we do have emotional chemical responses, and so the low hanging fruit is sort of taking something that's really easy and identifiable and saying this is a deep fake, and we need to figure out how to look for this, or this is disinformation, or this is misinformation or malinformation. And my concern is that it's too low hanging fruit because it's not getting at the core, which you just described, which is there's always bias. There's a reason that we have a trial by jury. There's a reason that we have rules of evidence. There's a reason that we have separation of powers. We're not the logical creatures that we think we are. And so we have to be aware, and librarians are probably the best audience for this, aware of the fact that very good people can have very different opinions. And even in the last 5 years, we've lost a lot of that capacity to see that people can think differently, that there isn't just one correct way of thinking, because we're not human computers. We're not,
Right, right,
we're
right.
not just, we grow up in cultures that somehow that childhood culture gets sort of interpreted into our subconscious, and it gives us motivations, it gives us a voice in our head, it gives us feelings. And so we can have very different backgrounds and experiences. So PD is important, but it also we have to be careful not to just look for the low hanging fruit and
Mm.
say, what are we doing here? Why are there so many books in libraries that disagree with each other? Why do we stock them? And what's the great, Mortimer Adler called it, the great conversation, right? The great human conversation of, hey, how do we feel about things? Why are there people who are conservative? Why are there people who are liberal? Um, I don't want to sound like that guy who says, the world has gone to hell since I went to college. But I do feel like I went to liberal arts college, and I do feel like that idea of you're helping to make yourself a better thinker isn't really the predominant model anymore. And we're going to need good thinkers because of AI,
Mm.
because AI is not actually, it says it's reasoning, but it's not. It's using uh, mathematical formulas for and
Prediction.
determining what would be the next good question and then modifying the answer based on the question. But I don't think it's doing rational thinking. So there need to be rational thinkers. There need to be those
Mm.
of us who sort of sat down and said, hey, okay, I'm hearing this story. Why does it not feel like it makes sense? And how do I drill down on that? I can give you a good example of that if you want, but feel free to take
Yeah,
this any
yeah.
direction you want to go.
Yeah. Um, well, I think there's a another shift happening. I mean, I think as a society, we shifted when the internet kind of like took over, and this ability to get information and to learn in different ways, and this transition from in education, maybe I'm thinking now more about like from the teacher in the front of the class being the holder of the knowledge and disseminating it top down to the student, and now more than ever AI is providing opportunities to, and you mentioned it when you described that earlier about like instant specific to exactly what I want at any given time. And I think it takes let's talk a little bit about vulnerability. And I think one thing holding back a lot of people is that they may feel insecure that they don't know all the answers because AI's changes so fast and so complicated, and that can cause people to like retreat a little bit instead of stepping up as leaders. So, can you talk a little bit about that, the need for vulnerability, and how could that look with people needing to transition into that more style instead of the way it has been?
So vulnerability isn't a word I have used before in this context, but I like it, and I'm glad you're thinking that way because uh, the kind of leadership probably that you and I are talking about when we talk about leadership isn't the leadership of bravado or um, um, whatever you might want to call it. It's more thought leadership or intellectual leadership. And so right now, I think the thought leadership in AI is careful, right? It's like, okay, so there is something magical going on. There's something that humans have in the 10,000 years of civilization. This is what we longed for, especially in the last 100 years, some computer capacity uh, to to evolve intelligence. I think we've worried about it. Is it going to be Skynet? Is it going to be
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah.
right? And so the kind of leadership that I think you and I are talking about, I'm not sure vulnerability would be my final word for it, but it would be more like thoughtful leadership, the willingness to hold different possible ideas in mind at one time and then say, okay, we're still trying to figure this out. So clearly, AI does some things really, really well for us. It's great for thinking and conversation. It's great for when you're staring at the blank page. It's great for helping you do deep research, right? You still have like if you had an assistant doing deep research, you would still check their work. AI probably a little bit more because it has this ability to fabricate. but it's doing certain things really, really well. It can't do truth. And so we need to be thinking about, okay, so can our thought leaders, as thought leaders, can we be saying, yes, we love what AI is doing, but we also have to be really careful, not only of the technology, but of the motivations of those who produce the technology. Because uh, I
Hmm.
call it the psychographic profile. So Facebook knows a lot about its users, and it can tailor advertising to those users. And they're beholden to their shareholders to maximize profits. And so they will do things that are questionable in order to get an outcome. So the ability to sort of create a definition of who you are and how you think, and then market to you is a part of the social media process. Keeping you fixated on the technology is another core need that they have. They need you to be staring at the screen in order to watch the ads and to get the revenue. And so AI, because it's language based and because it's individualized, is going to learn an enormous amount about us. And I'm sorry, commercial organizations someone will use that information. If someone steps down, another person will step up because it's too valuable to not use in a commercial context. And so we need thoughtful people to say, hey, we have to be really careful about this. There's a reason that people under age 18 aren't supposed to be using these technologies, right? There are reasons that we want to be really careful about how much data we put into them, and not just because of the commercial interest, but also these companies have a checkered history with their own vulnerability to data breaches. So all this, what you think may be a private conversation, number one, may not actually be in the back bowels of the organization, but also because it could accidentally get released. So there
Right.
are lots of really important questions.
Hmm. Well, I mean, ever since, the ChatGPT moment, when they, released it to the world, and then suddenly Google released theirs, and then everyone came, the major seven or six or seven tech companies all released their models. I mean, I the first thing that was important to me was to try to get to know all the CEOs and a little bit about, who they were and what their backgrounds were. And it's just it's tricky, because they I don't know, it's hard. You have to on one hand try to evaluate, what their intentions might be and how easily they can be influenced and what direction they're trying to go and how safe and secure are is their policies in what everyone's using. And but it's also it's just not so easy to know. And I think some people, like, it's easy to have people want to disengage even more because it's such commercial driven. We're racing with China and everyone's just like not maybe going as slow as we should. Um, I've had a few librarians challenge me about certain things with their disgust and objection to AI. And part of the thing that I can't help but address when I face that challenge is the need for us to help. It's not going away, and our kids, especially the ones that are trying to almost ready to enter the workforce now. Like if they're entering and there isn't much time, and I feel like we have an obligation, opportunity to kind of help learn ourselves so that we can help the patrons that we care about. So, I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? It's kind of a lot, but
I I love some of the language connections here, right? So there's generative AI,
mm,
and the word generative is a beautiful word. Uh, Eric Erickson used it to describe a stage of life where you care about helping the next generations, not for your own benefit, but for them to kind of set them up.
mm,
So I talk a lot about generative teaching, right, which is this idea that there's this beautiful language parallel, but it opens the door to us thinking about what are we actually doing in teaching? Are we helping the next generation to become good thinkers and inherit a world that we've been thoughtful about, right? Then the other word I love, the word parallel I love, is agentic. So we're talking a lot about agentic AI. And agentic learning is self-directed learning, right? So we want to help people become self-directed learners. But let me tell you a little bit about the secret of schools. I call this uh, the truth about schools.
Hmm.
Like these other institutions we've talked about, schools are not what we say they are. So we like to think of schools as places where every child develops their intellectual capacity, but that's not why schools developed, why compulsory public schooling is uh, uh, universal around the world. It's because schooling, as Plato defined it, puts people into categories and makes society operate smoother when you convince people that they're gold, silver, or brass. It's
Oh,
about
wow.
inculcating compliance and the acceptance of authority. And so most kids don't leave high school as scholars, as independent thinkers. And the kids who succeed do what I call the game of school. They have learned what they have to do to get good grades and to be in the good graces of their teachers. So there are some really important conversations to be had about what's actually going on when we think about teaching and learning and students. And so if they're learning in captivity, if they're in these sort of structured environments, then we have to be careful not to create solutions for that captivity that aren't actually appropriate. Here's a glaring example. The company that is installing video cameras in classrooms to see if students are paying attention.
Yeah, that's
That's
popular
the
in China
wrong,
too.
yeah, that's the wrong, in my view, that's the wrong way to think about helping students want to pay attention. It's a compliance kind of obedience structure. If if you're not moving your mouse enough, then we think you're not paying attention. If your eyes aren't on the teacher, you're not paying attention. That's a prison-like experience. That's not an agentic learning experience. It's not generative teaching.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be a little bit careful about saying, okay, we're talking about AI in classrooms. We're talking about AI with students. Some of these things we have to realize are being described within the context of that environment, and they're not necessarily healthy for the students. They may produce a sigh of relief from the teacher. Okay, I don't have to worry about this anymore. Or the parents may feel okay. But these big questions, this is really deep, right? But we couldn't really, we would not be comfortable with a school system that produced real independent thinking and scholarship by every student.
Mm,
When Plato called it the noble lie, he says we have to tell a lie, but it's for a noble purpose because society can't operate if everybody's independent. So even though we
mm,
think that school is about helping people become independent thinkers, it actually does the opposite because we don't really want a society of independent thinkers. It's not good for commerce. It's not good for governance. We there was a famous report in the 1970s called A Crisis of Democracy because it felt like the leaders of the country felt like the what the 60s showed was that if there was too much democracy, the country would have trouble and they would have
mm,
trouble leading the country. This isn't like some way out weird conspiracy thinking. This was the Trilateral Commission saying we have to reduce the level of
mm,
democracy in order to govern effectively. So
mm.
it raises all kinds of really interesting questions.
Yeah.
If we think the way around that is to say, let's talk about AI for learning, not classroom use, but how are you using AI to be a better learner? And that's what really interests me.
Yeah. It's pretty fascinating too because I mean, I love learning so much, almost to a fault at some point. And this is mostly why I think I've loved being a librarian my whole career or most of my careers because the ability to like get information. I mean, I'm a nonfiction reader. I love learning in different modalities. I learn from YouTube more than probably anything, and other people as well. But now with AI though, depending on what tools and systems, and most people think of generative large language models when they're thinking about AI, but now we're starting to like embed all these other tools and abilities that can contribute to learning. Like I feel more empowered as a learner now than I've ever in my life. And I mean, I'm scared, of course, of AI, and I come across as like a big AI fanboy or whatever, but the ability that it has to for me to be able to learn and to get instant information, even though it's not always accurate or correct or whatever, is just it's pretty amazing and somewhat unprecedented, I think. Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more questions. If you still have time, let's make
Yeah.
these kind of quick. Um,
Can I bring up one other point?
oh, good. Yes, I'm sorry.
When we talk about the concerns of the companies who have massive investments in these technologies, there's a reason that we have the phrase power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Mm,
Right.
hmm
Again, it's this recognition of our human nature.
mm,
And so that would be one really good reason to be careful and thoughtful about these large language model companies and the AI companies, because when they hold that power, they may do things that are different than the things that they would say they will do now,
mm.
right? Because people
Yeah,
change,
yeah.
and
hmm
it's like grassroots leaders who become president of a country and then all of a sudden become the very thing that they were fighting against.
Right.
Okay, humility is a good word there, right? It's the humility to understand that there are human motivations that aren't always the best for everyone, and they
Mm,
can change. And so we have to be sort of humble about how do we ensure that this doesn't become so tempting that we've lost control,
right. Right.
become that
Well,
caricature of the future.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I'm sure you know about OpenAI, the company that creates ChatGPT. They were founded, Elon Musk with it was all open source and nonprofit, and then he left because and then they tried to sue them because I mean Elon still talks about that about how upset it is because it's they were trying to be closed source and for profit, which and then of course now he has his own same thing too, so it supports your point exactly.
I will tell you that, like any other large major public figure, I don't take what Elon Musk says as truth necessarily,
Right, right.
right? Because they're telling stories and they're not always necessarily malicious or purposefully deceptive. But I don't know about you. I tell my own stories in a way that makes me feel okay about me, right? And
hmm
so this human aspect of we're going to tell the story that makes us feel like we're the hero or the best in the story. So it's a very tricky territory.
Yeah.
I will say that Grok, because Grok doesn't have, so there are really two components to training a large language model. This is generalized, but there's the set of data, the sources that the model is trained on, and then there's usually an enormous amount of human training that takes place afterwards, where humans rate the responses and tell it whether or not it was a good response, and that's where a lot of politically correct stuff comes in, right? Which is if you it's not only the large language model is not only biased by the bulk of human material, it's also biased by the political or correct beliefs of the people who are doing the training. Which is why Google got into such trouble with producing historical images that were not racially accurate, right? So it's like, okay, I get the motivation, but at the same time, this is really a tricky area. So
Mhm.
I use Grok probably more than any other large language model.
Really?
Mhm.
That was one of my questions. Okay.
And I use Claude. Claude does the best thinking. It's most close to my own thinking. The Chinese Manus, M-A-N-U-S, Manus,
hmm
um,
Manus.
produces incredibly thoughtful responses. They're all. I don't use ChatGPT a lot because I feel like the answers are short and they're not as deep thinking. I use Perplexity because of its great capacity to search Reddit and other forums. So
Research.
if I have a spreadsheet question or a car repair question, Perplexity has been my go-to.
Hmm.
So it's interesting how they've developed different specialties and characteristics. But I do think that I'm trying to get back to your original question. I do think that Grok has done a good job of creating an environment which is less constrained. That has its
Yeah, yeah.
insides, but
I mean, and Elon Musk is constantly talking about, truth seeking. What is the word before that? Naturally, or a truth seeking AI is what he is claiming to strive for. Um, yeah, it's really interesting too, because as they also keep advancing and different models come out, they are constantly getting better at different things. Okay, let's go on to the last question then. What kind of advice would you have for a librarian that's either new or considering becoming a librarian? So someone that's kind of young in the profession.
yeah, I'm certainly not qualified to answer that question.
Well, yeah, but
from
you
but
you
from
are though in a different. This is wait. You know what? Actually, this is addressing an important topic of AI literacy and learning about AI from different perspectives is so valuable. If I only asked that question to, retired librarians, that would be a very limited perspective. And you have worked so closely with hundreds of thousands of librarians over your career. So you have a really, really important perspective. So yeah, you don't need to be, like everyone has, you bring a really valuable perspective to the question.
So I went to a conference for school librarians held by School Library Journal, and I spent the day listening to speakers who would get up and say, "We know that the library is at the heart of the school." And I thought, uh, I wish that were true. The fact that there are fewer than one school librarian per school in the United States would say that the the general populace doesn't believe that the library is the heart of the school. That it hasn't for a long time. And again, that kind of goes back to my rant about schooling. Because if school were really about learning, the library would be the heart of the school. So, it, and I think that I hear the same thing about local community libraries. People will say, "Oh, the library should be the heart of the community." Well, I think it is for some, but it's not in the generalized way that people go to the library. Most of my friends don't go to the library regularly. They go to the
Right.
YMCA more than they go to the library, or
Yeah, yeah.
they go to Planet Fitness, whatever it is. So I think there is a moment here of really trying to understand the role and value of the library.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking that when maker spaces became a big thing in school libraries,
Mm-hmm.
that it had more to do with feeling relevant than the actual role of the library. Like finally people are coming into the library. We're doing makerspace. Yeah, this is wonderful. And my question was, yeah, I love that, but that doesn't feel like that was my understanding of the intellectual value of the library, this place where the great conversations of humanity were being housed and held, right?
Yeah, right,
Learning
right.
to do research and learning to think. So I don't have any advice for somebody going into the library field, but I do have a desire to see libraries find the message that would
Mm,
bring people back to the library for those deeper purposes,
mm,
right? So how do we uh, reconstruct the public view of what a library is? And
mhm.
yeah, you could say, well, if librarians really understand AI, then people would go to the library to understand AI. Honestly, I don't think that's realistic. I love the vision of it, but I don't think librarians are going to be confident enough to really feel like they can talk about AI. We did a session called How to Talk About AI with Your Patrons, right? It's like, okay, you know, we're confused. How are we going to explain it to a patron?
Right, right.
As this evolves, there is going to be a big question of what's the role of the library in an AI world? And I
Hmm.
honestly don't know that I have a good answer for it, except that my favorite people are librarians.
Yeah,
Well, I want to figure it out. I
right, right.
don't want to personally figure it out. I want us to figure it out.
Yeah.
because we really need people who think deeply about information and information sources and how you navigate this great conversation, the human conversation that's so important to navigate.
Yeah, I think for me, adaptability comes to mind, and I look back at my career, and I've seen, and I know a lot of other librarians, and I've seen budget cuts and the impact that what you're talking about, has, and the schools and communities that have a librarian that has adapted and is indispensable with their community. Uh, uh, Adapts to whatever their community might need, in different ways. So whether they needed a makerspace or not, but I mean, I see so many valuable librarians that like suddenly are out and about. Like school librarians are a good example of that. K-12, it used to be the lib, and it still is for so many schools where everyone comes to the library, but at least in some of the schools that I've worked in the past, they didn't need to come to the library. I would go into the classroom. I would bring the resources, digital or even physical resources from the library, but into the classroom. I spent more of my time in classrooms, collaborating with teachers and integrating library and information literacy skills in a different way. And so I feel like that more of that is going to need to continue if the role of librarian is going to continue to be valuable and needed. It's not easy to define how that might look, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's got to be some kind of problem that librarians can help solve, and I think AI can be.
You know who loves libraries?
Who's that?
Homeschoolers.
Oh, yeah, yeah, especially public libraries.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So I think there's the potential, and YouTube is that you get so much information from YouTube. I think is instructive because YouTube exists outside of traditional schooling, but it's
Hmm.
become an incredible place of learning. So what will happen if AI becomes a better place of learning than school? And we've seen since the pandemic larger numbers of kids leaving schools and going into homeschooling.
Hmm.
So what if AI actually breaks the school model?
Yeah. I
I'm
mean,
not sure it will.
it's threatening. Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
a conversation. People
schooling
are
is
talking about it.
a very, I mean, so many people's incomes depend on schooling, all of the services, all of the people who work in schools, just the way we think about life. It's very hard to imagine schooling going away. But what if AI breaks the model enough that
Mhm.
more people are doing independent, like homeschool learning? And what if they are the ones who are the biggest champions of the library?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
interesting?
Yeah. Well, we can't end this conversation until we have everything figured out. So I hope you have, I hope you're comfortable. No, I'm
Several
just kidding.
years, man.
Yes. All right. Well, Steve, hey, thank you so much for taking time to chat. I love what you're doing. Appreciate your work. How can people find you and support what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's library20.com. It's a free community. You do have to join in order to get access to a lot of the material, but it's free. And once you join, you'll start getting regular emails from me, and hopefully you'll be glad to get them.
Yes. Well, and I'll tell you, I wrote about this in my book already. The AI conferences online that you make happen have been unbelievably helpful for thousands and thousands of people. And I mean, I've obsessed about AI for a handful of years now, like, and it's pretty refreshing to see so many other librarians passionate and involved in sharing information. So you really, I appreciate you so much and keep up the good work.
Thanks. Appreciate the
Okay.
conversation.